Chick Corea, an architect of the jazz-rock fusion boom in the 1970s who spent more than a half-century as one of the foremost pianists in jazz, died on Tuesday at home in Tampa, Florida. He was 79. The cause was cancer, said Dan Muse, a web and marketing manager for Mr. Corea. Mr. Corea's best-known band was Return to Forever, a collective with a rotating membership that nudged the genre of fusion into greater contact with Brazilian, Spanish and other global influences. It also provided Mr. Corea with a palette on which to experiment with a growing arsenal of new technologies. But throughout his career he never abandoned his first love, the acoustic piano, on which his punctilious touch and crisp sense of harmony made his playing immediately distinctive. A number of his compositions, including Spain, 500 Miles High, and Tones for Joan's Bones, have become jazz standards, all defined by his dreamy but brightly illuminated harmonies and his ear-grabbing melodies. By the late 1960s, Mr. Corea, still in his 20s, had already established himself as a force to be reckoned with. He gigged and recorded with some of the leading names in straight-ahead and Latin jazz, including Dizzy Gillespie, Stan Getz, Mongo, Santamaria and Vaughan. His first two albums as a leader, Tones for Joan's Bones, 1966, and Now He Sings, Now He Sobs, 1968, earned rave reviews. Both are now thought of as classics. But it was playing in Miles Davis's ensembles that set Mr. Corea on the path that would most define his role in jazz. He played the electric piano on Davis's In a Silent Way, 1969, and Bitches Brew, 1970, the albums that sounded the opening bell for the fusion era. Soon after leaving Davis's group, he helped found Return to Forever, and spent much of the 1970s touring and recording with the band, which became one of the most popular instrumental ensembles of its era. Reviewing a performance at the Blue Note in New York in 2006, the critic Nate Chinnan, writing in the New York Times, recalled the innovative sound that Mr. Corea had honed with Return to Forever 3 decades before. His Fender Rhodes piano chimed and chirruped over Latin American rhythms, female vocals commingled with the soothing flutter of a flute. Then the ensemble muscled up and morphed into a hyperactive fusion band, establishing pop chart presence and a fan base to match. To the extent that there is a Return to Forever legacy, it encompasses both these dynamic extremes, each a facet of Mr. Corea's personality. By the time of that Blue Note show, Mr. Corea's career was entering a chapter of happy reminiscence, full of reunion concerts and retrospective projects. But he continued to build out from the groundwork he had laid. In 2013, for instance, he released 2 albums introducing new bands: The Vigil, featuring an electrified quintet of younger musicians, and Trilogy, an acoustic trio album on which he was joined by the bassist Christian McBride and the drummer Brian Blade. He kept up a busy touring schedule well into his late 70s, and his performances at the Blue Note in particular often combined reunions with longtime associates and collaborations with younger accompanists, mixing nostalgia with a will to forge ahead. Those performances often found their way onto albums, including The Musician, 2017, a 3-disc collection drawn from his nearly 2-month-long residency at the club in 2011, when he was celebrating his 70th birthday in the company of such fellow luminaries as the pianist Herbie Hancock, the bassist and Return to Forever co-founder Stanley Clarke, and the vocalist Bobby McFerrin. By the end of his career, Mr. Corea had recorded close to 90 albums as a bandleader or co-leader, and he raked in 23 Grammys, more than almost any other musician. He also won 3 Latin Grammys. In 2006 he was named a National Endowment for the Arts Jazz Master, the highest honor available to an American jazz musician. But he did not believe in musical categories. It's the media that are so interested in categorizing music, he told The Times in 1983, the media and the businessmen, who, after all, have a vested interest in keeping marketing clear-cut and separate. If critics would ask musicians their views about what is happening, you would find that there is always a fusion of sorts taking place. All this means is a continual development, a continual merging of different streams. Mr. Corea's first marriage ended in divorce. He met Gail Moran, who became his second wife, in the 1970s, when he was in Return to Forever and she was a singer and keyboardist with the Mahavishnu Orchestra, another top-flight fusion band. She survives him, as do a son, Thaddeus, a daughter, Liana Corea, and 2 grandchildren. In the early 1970s, Mr. Corea converted to Scientology, and the religion's teachings informed much of his music from then on, including his work with Return to Forever. Armando Anthony Corea was born on June 12, 1941, in Chelsea, Mass., near Boston. His father, also named Armando Corea, was a trumpeter and bandleader in Boston, and his mother, Anna Zacconi Corea, was a homemaker. He began studying piano when he was 4. He picked up his nickname from an aunt, who often pinched his big cheeks and called him Cheeky. The name morphed into the pithier Chick. He moved to New York City in the late 1950s to study at Columbia University in Juilliard, but that lasted only a few months. As Miles Davis had a generation before, when Davis arrived at Juilliard from East Street, Louis, Mr. Corea quickly found himself lured out of the classroom and into the clubs. Some of his earliest gigs came in the bands of the famed Latin jazz percussionists Mongo Santamaria and Willie Bobo, as well as with the swing-era vocalist and bandleader Cab Calloway. In 1968 he assumed the piano chair in Davis's influential quintet, replacing Herbie Hancock. The band quickly went into the studio to record the final tracks that would round out Via de Kilimanjaro, Davis's first album to feature an electric piano. It signaled the trumpeter's growing embrace of rock and funk music, a move encouraged by his second wife, the vocalist Betty Davis. One of the 2 tracks featuring Mr. Corea is a tribute to her, the 16.5-minute, Mademoiselle Mabry. The group gradually expanded in size as Davis wandered deeper into the murky, wriggling sound world of his early fusion albums. Davis brought a version of his Bitches Brew band to the Isle of Wight Festival in 1970 before an audience of 600,000, the largest of his career. Soon after playing the concert, Mr. Corea and the bassist Dave Holland left Davis's ensemble and joined with the drummer Barry Altschul and the saxophonist Anthony Braxton to found Circle, a short-lived but influential group that combined elements of fusion with an avant-garde approach. Mr. Corea founded Return to Forever in 1971 with Mr. Clark, the saxophonist and flutist Joe Farrell, the percussionist Erdo Moreira and the vocalist Flora Porum. The following year, the band released its Brazilian-tinged debut album, titled simply, Return to Forever, on the ECM label. Also in 1972, Mr. Corea teamed up for the first time with the vibraphonist Gary Burton to record another album for the same label, Crystal Silence. The two became longtime friends and collaborators. Taken together, the two ECM albums represented something close to the full breadth of Mr. Corea's identity as a musician, ranging from the serene and meditative to the zesty and driving. Return to Forever changed personnel frequently and eventually went on an extended hiatus, but as Mr. Corea explained it, the group never really broke up. Its most enduring lineup featured Mr. Corea, Mr. Clark, the guitarist Al Di Meola and the drummer Lenny White. That quartet iteration released a string of popular albums, Where Have I Known You Before, 1974, No Mystery, 1975, and Romantic Warrior, 1976 that hit the top 40. Mr. Corea released a number of other influential fusion albums in his own, including My Spanish Heart, 1976, and a string of recordings with his electric band and his acoustic band. Like, share and subscribe my